There's a particular kind of problem that only shows up once things are going well, and it's not something people tend to speak about openly, because from the outside, everything appears exactly as it should. You've built something. You've achieved what you set out to achieve. You've created a life that at one point you were certain would feel different. And yet there's a gap, and it's subtle and difficult to articulate, but undeniably present. Now, in a moment, I'm going to explain exactly why that gap exists and why almost no one sees it clearly. But first, it's worth looking at how it actually shows up, because it doesn't show up as failure. If anything, it shows up alongside competence. You're capable, decisive, respected, the person others rely on when things matter. And that becomes part of the identity. But underneath that, something else begins to form. A constant mental activity you can't quite switch off. An underlying pressure that doesn't seem to have a clear source. A sense that even in moments that should feel good, you're not entirely there. You might notice in quiet moments, sitting with family but still thinking, taking time off but not actually unwinding, achieving something significant and feeling less than expected. And there's a particular thought that tends to follow. Is this it? Not in a dramatic sense, just in a quiet, almost inconvenient realization that something hasn't landed the way you thought it would. Now, most people respond to that feeling in a very predictable way. They try to solve it externally. They refine, they optimize, they pursue the next level. And for a while, that works. It creates movement, it creates distraction, but it doesn't resolve the underlying issue. And in a moment, I'll show you precisely why that approach can never work, no matter how successful you become. Because the problem isn't where most people are looking. The reason that gap exists is not because something is missing from your life. It's because of the way your experience of life is being generated. Most people assume their feelings come from circumstance, from outcomes, from the achievements, from what is or isn't happening around them. But that's not actually how it works. Your experience is being created moment to moment by the interpretations your mind is making. And if that internal system is conditioned around pressure, control, responsibility, the need to maintain a certain standard, then even the most ideal circumstance will be filtered through that lens, which means they will never feel the way you expect them to feel. And before I go further, because this is often where people begin to recognize themselves, it's probably more useful for you to hear from someone who has already achieved a great deal and still found themselves facing exactly this. I'll let you listen.
I came to Gideon during a period of intense pressure. I was leading a company, raising capital. The Path of Gideon method gave me a structured way to let go of the beliefs that were quietly draining me. I now feel lighter, I feel more focused, and genuinely free to create from a place of peace.
What makes this particularly challenging is that it's not obvious enough to justify concern, but it's persistent enough to affect everything. It influences how you show up in relationships, not overtly, but in subtle ways. A lack of presence, a slight emotional distance, an inability to fully let your guard down. It affects your ability to rest, because even when nothing is required of you, your system doesn't quite stand down. And perhaps most importantly, it creates a quiet, underlying sense that you're still not where you thought you would be, even if logically you know you are. Now, here's the part most people never realize, and it's critical. This isn't something you can fix by doing more. And in a moment, I'll show you what actually changes it. Because once you understand how this is being created, the entire dynamic shifts. What I do is help people see very precisely the patterns they've been unconsciously living inside, not at the level of behavior, but at the level of identity, where meaning is formed, where pressure is generated, where the sense of self is maintained. And once that becomes visible, not intellectually but experientially, it begins to dissolve. Not through effort, not through discipline, but through clarity. And what replaces it is not something new. It's what was already there beneath the noise. There's a particular moment people often describe when this begins to shift. It's subtle but unmistakable. And the next perspective captures this really well.
So, I've worked with countless advisors, coaches, and consultants over the years, but Gideon's method is just unlike anything I've ever experienced. In just a few short sessions, I completely dissolved patterns of overthinking that had been, following me around for decades. Today, I make decisions with clarity, and my team has noticed the shift too.
When this changes, you don't become less effective. If anything, the opposite happens, because you're no longer operating from pressure. Decisions become clearer, your thinking becomes quieter. Your presence, particularly in relationships, deepens. And perhaps most significantly, you're no longer chasing a feeling that never quite arrives, because you're no longer creating the conditions that prevent it. If you're recognizing yourself in this, there's one way to take this further. A private clarity conversation with me, a space where we can look clearly without assumption at what is actually happening for you beneath the surface, and whether working together in a more focused, high-level capacity would be appropriate. This isn't a casual call. It's designed to give you a precise understanding of what's been shaping your experience and what it would take to change it completely. Below this video, you'll find a link to arrange that conversation. If you've recognized yourself in what we've explored here, that's the next step. Earlier, I mentioned that most people never truly see what's driving this. This is where that begins to change. Because beyond a certain level of success, the question is no longer, how do I achieve more? It becomes, why does it not feel the way I expected it to? Because once you see the answer to that clearly, you don't need to chase anything further.